70 palatial mansions once lined Fifth Avenue, each one a Vanderbilt fortress built to outlast centuries. By 1973, wrecking balls had claimed them all. Indeed, this was the architecture of American supremacy, when one family's railroad monopoly generated daily profits exceeding what most corporations earned annually. They commanded fleets, owned legislatures, and treated the stock market as their personal casino. But the very excesses that announced their dominance, 100-course dinners, private trains, European castles dismantled and shipped stone by stone to Newport, became the instruments of their downfall. And in less than 90 years, inheritors who had never worked a day squandered what took 3 lifetimes to build. Today, we share how America's greatest fortune became its most public destruction, measured not in dollars lost, but in dynasties dissolved. While most videos about the Vanderbilt dynasty you'll find online focus on how much money they made, spent and eventually lost, the real tragedy of America's richest family unfolded in secret. You see, the scandalous rise and fall of the Vanderbilt family is rarely ever told as it truly was, an epic downfall stemming from parenting failures that swung from brutal authoritarianism to neglectful indulgence, of children warped by wealth they never earned, and of a dynasty where money became both god and demon. Thus, in today's episode of Old Money Luxury, we share a one-of-a-kind analysis of how America's richest dynasty was doomed from its very inception, not by spending habits, but by the mental patterns established by its founder and amplified through each successive generation.
Cornelius Vanderbilt had what he called a mania for money. It's all he cared about. He didn't care about his family so much, he cared about the money. And that mania for money, that pathology, infected every subsequent generation in ways that it's just kind of fascinating to see how it kind of infected them.
Cornelius Vanderbilt's relationship with money bordered on madness. "I have been insane on the subject of money-making all my life," he once confessed, offering a rare glimpse into his self-awareness. This was no exaggeration from a successful businessman. It stood as the raw admission of a man whose identity had fused completely with wealth accumulation. Anderson Cooper, his great-great-great-grandson, assessed him bluntly. "I actually started out thinking maybe he was a psychopath." Cooper eventually concluded that money had become his sole reason for being. The Commodore's fixation transcended any desire for luxury or comfort. "I don't care half so much about making money as I do about making my point and coming out ahead," he declared, revealing that wealth served as his scoreboard in an endless competition. This psychological framework would later spread through the family dynasty like a virus. Born in Staten Island in 1794, Vanderbilt quit school at age 11 to work on his father's ferry. By 16, he had borrowed $100 from his mother to purchase his first boat. The seed of obsession had been planted early, a boy calculating profits while other children played. The human toll of this obsession proved devastating. He committed his wife to a mental asylum when she became an inconvenience. He sent his son, Cornelius Jeremiah, to the same institution, possibly because of his homosexuality. Every relationship bowed before his financial ambitions. As a father, the Commodore ruled with iron-fisted cruelty. He habitually demeaned his son, William Henry, labeling him a blockhead and a blatherskite, a person who speaks nonsense. This verbal assault cut so deep that William Henry suffered a nervous breakdown at age 19. Rather than offering support, the Commodore banished his son to manage a small family farm on Staten Island, effectively discarding the disappointment. His indifference extended to his 9 daughters, treating them as afterthoughts in his dynastic plans. The emotional damage extended beyond his children. Vanderbilt wielded his fortune as a weapon even after death, bequeathing 95% to William Henry, while the remaining 5% went to his other 10 children. Money functioned as his ultimate control mechanism, extending his tyranny beyond the grave. His business tactics matched his personal brutality. He crushed competitors without hesitation, treating business as warfare and accumulation as conquest. Starting with ferries, then steamships, and finally railroads, he consolidated transportation monopolies through manipulation and ruthlessness. Competitors often paid him substantial sums simply to operate elsewhere, monuments to the fear he inspired. His steamship monopolies earned him the title Commodore, a nickname that followed him even as he transitioned to railroad dominance. When challenged, he famously declared, What do I care about the law? Ain't I got the power? By his death in 1877, he had amassed approximately $105 million, making the Vanderbilt's the wealthiest family on the planet. What the Commodore failed to anticipate was how his pathological relationship with money would transform across generations. The obsession with making money would gradually mutate into an equally destructive obsession with spending it. The ruthless focus that built the fortune would give way to an aimless, undisciplined approach that would ultimately destroy it. And the scars from his authoritarian parenting would ripple through the family line, creating generations of children traumatized by harshness or crippled by permissiveness. The Commodore's money pathology had begun its devastating journey through the Vanderbilt bloodline.
So the major question when it comes to the Vanderbilt empire after the patriarch's death is, what did Billy Vanderbilt do with the money? And to his credit, Billy ended up doubling the money with time, carefully maintaining the Vanderbilt fortune through the opulence and performance of the Gilded Age.
William Henry Vanderbilt emerged from his father's shadow like a man climbing from darkness into blinding light. The man who would eventually double the staggering Vanderbilt fortune began his journey as the family's great disappointment. The Commodore's constant ridicule crushed him so thoroughly that at 19 his mind fractured, a nervous breakdown that would forever alter his relationship with both wealth and family. After his collapse, William Henry found himself exiled to a muddy patch of Staten Island farmland. Banished from his father's empire, he discovered an unexpected talent buried beneath the weight of paternal disapproval. The failing farm blossomed under his hand. More remarkably, the struggling Staten Island Railroad, a failing enterprise, transformed into a profitable venture through his unexpected business acumen. The Commodore, returning from a European tour in 1853, found his blockhead son had become something unforeseen, competent. This psychological resurrection from broken, dismissed heir to trusted successor came at a profound interior cost. Unlike his father, who worshipped at the altar of wealth, William Henry developed an almost superstitious fear of his own fortune. Massive wealth provided no advantages over moderate wealth, he would mutter like a man haunted by a curse. His fortune brought him nothing but anxiety, the complaint of a man drowning in golden waters. In a moment of startling clarity, William Henry once gazed at his neighbor's modest home and observed, "He isn't worth 100th part as much as I am, but he has more of the real pleasures of life than I have. His house is as comfortable as mine, even if it didn't cost so much. His team is about as good as mine. His opera box is next to mine. His health is better than mine, and he will probably outlive me, and he can trust his friends." The words hung in the air, a billionaire's confession of emptiness. This fundamental ambivalence coexisted strangely with ruthless business tactics. When questioned about discontinuing a popular express train, William Henry infamously declared, "The public be damned. I don't take any stock in this silly nonsense about working for anybody but our own." This psychological resurrection from broken, dismissed heir to trusted successor came at a profound interior cost. Unlike his father, who worshipped at the altar of wealth, William Henry developed an almost superstitious fear of his own fortune. When William Henry inherited his father's fortune in 1877, the scars of childhood emotional abuse shaped his approach to his own children. While the Commodore had been described as a mean man, never kindly or loving, like a dictator with his children, William Henry swung to the opposite extreme. He lavished his children with European travels and cultural experiences, taking his youngest son, George, on art collecting expeditions by the time the boy was 12. A painting titled "Going to the Opera," commissioned by William Henry, spoke volumes, depicting the family gathered in their mansion, older children dressed for the opera, servants hovering in the background. The image captured what he had craved as a child, family warmth wrapped in visible prosperity. Unlike the Commodore, who concentrated 95% of wealth in a single heir, William Henry dispersed his fortune widely. Each child received approximately $10 million, transforming them into what Arthur T. Vanderbilt II would later describe as a bunch of mini emperors, not one showing any interest in making money or even keeping track of it, just spending it. William Henry's frail health cut short his reign at the pinnacle of American prosperity, and he resigned his railroad presidencies in 1883 due to chronic sickness. Just 2 years later, at age 64, He collapsed during a business meeting with Baltimore and Ohio Railroad President Robert Garrett. His death came merely 8 years after inheriting, fatally limiting his time to transmit financial discipline to his children. The psychological pendulum had swung from the Commodore's cruel authoritarian parenting to William Henry's indulgent permissiveness. The father who suffered from too little nurturing gave his children too much freedom. The man who endured harsh expectations imposed virtually none on his heirs. This unspoken psychological reaction against his own childhood would shape the dynasty's fate more profoundly than any business decision he ever made.
Mr. Vanderbilt has no fads or hobbies. He is a man of strong domestic tastes and finds his chief enjoyment in the family circle. The Times, 1893.
The Gilded Dynasty needed a golden child, and Cornelius Vanderbilt II fit the role perfectly. Heir to a business empire and bearer of his grandfather's name, he alone would navigate the treacherous waters between wealth's creation and its inevitable dissolution. Born in 1843 on Staten Island, he emerged as the favorite grandson of the fearsome Commodore and eldest son of William Henry. Unlike his father, who suffered beneath the Commodore's caustic criticism, young Cornelius received validation from the beginning. His work ethic, while clerking at the Shoe and Leather Bank in New York City, endeared him to his grandfather, the Commodore, who was a strong believer in personal industry. This early approval created a fundamentally different psychological foundation than his father's nervous breakdown and exile. While William Henry had scraped and clawed for his father's respect, Cornelius II inherited it. This psychological security manifested in a dual approach to wealth, maintaining his father's business acumen while developing an unprecedented philanthropy. He built two of America's most spectacular mansions, the Vanderbilt Chateau and the Breakers, but rarely had time to enjoy them. Instead, he made a habit of donating much of his income to various charitable causes. Yet beneath this veneer of success and generosity lurked a familiar Vanderbilt trait: authoritarian control. Cornelius II proved to be a hard-nosed man in his relations with his older children. When his son Cornelius III announced in 1896 that he wished to marry Grace Graham Wilson, Cornelius II refused permission. No reason was given. The patriarch's word was enough. When the young couple married anyway, Cornelius II responded with the ultimate weapon in a wealthy man's arsenal: disinheritance. The hard-nosed approach to his elder children contrasted sharply with his treatment of his youngest son, Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt, born in 1880. By Reginald's birth, Cornelius II had reached 37 years of age, established, secure, and increasingly indulgent. The family now occupied the pinnacle of New York society. Reginald grew up knowing only extreme privilege, never witnessing the striving that built the colossal fortune. Then came the turning point. In 1896, when Reginald was 16, Cornelius II suffered a stroke. This health crisis compelled him to reduce his active business involvement precisely during his youngest son's most formative years. The timing proved catastrophic for the family fortune. With his father's influence waning, Reginald's character development took a dangerous turn. The final blow fell on the 12th of September, 1899. Father Cornelius II died of a cerebral hemorrhage shortly after 6 a.m. at his home on West 57th Street in Manhattan. Reginald was only 19 years old, a critical juncture when financial discipline and business acumen should have been firmly instilled. Instead, the heir now had unfettered access to millions without the tempering guidance his forebears had received. Cornelius II left an estate valued at nearly $73 million, with $20 million in real estate alone. His older children, those shaped by his stricter parenting, largely maintained the family's business interests and philanthropic endeavors. But Reginald, the child of his father's declining years, followed a radically different path. While his brother Cornelius III wanted to make a contribution to society, Reginald abandoned Yale after 2 years to pursue horses and high living. The psychological journey across 3 generations had reached its pivotal moment. The founder's monomania for money-making had morphed into William Henry's ambivalent wealth expansion, then into Cornelius II's wealth management and philanthropy. Now in Reginald's hands, the fortune faced its greatest test. A young man with all the resources of a Vanderbilt, but none of the psychological foundation that had built the family empire. The pudgy figure in the roadster presented a startling spectacle to rural onlookers. Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt, heir to one of history's greatest fortunes, raced down country lanes with a bull terrier perched beside him, burning fuel as recklessly as he burned money. Born in 1880, as the youngest son of Cornelius II, Reginald emerged from a perfect storm of psychological vulnerability. His great-grandfather had died before his birth, his grandfather, William Henry, when he was merely 5. His father suffered a stroke when Reginald was 16, then died when the boy was 19. 3 generations of financial discipline had evaporated, leaving only wealth without wisdom. The consequences manifested immediately and spectacularly. On his 21st birthday, having gained access to an inheritance of $15.5 million, approximately $460 million in today's currency, Reginald celebrated by losing $70,000 at the gambling table in a single night. This staggering sum, equivalent to over $2 million today, disappeared without a moment's hesitation or remorse. Yale University suffered his indifferent attendance for 2 years before he abandoned education entirely. His profligacy knew no bounds. He commissioned solid gold nameplates for each of his 60 thoroughbred horses. He purchased hundreds of automobiles on pure whim. During one legendary evening at the roulette tables, he hemorrhaged $120,000, nearly $4 million in contemporary valuation. Over his lifetime, Reginald inherited $25 million, approximating $742 million today, all of which vanished through drink and gambling. By age 42, doctors delivered a stark prognosis: stop drinking or die. Reginald responded by marrying 17-year-old socialite Gloria Morgan. 3 years later, in 1925, cirrhosis of the liver claimed him at age 45. He left behind an 18-month-old daughter, also named Gloria, who would later achieve fame as a fashion designer. But the most shocking revelation came after his death. The heir to the greatest fortune in American history had died broke. He'd blasted through his entire fortune and incurred huge debts besides. Only a $5 million trust fund remained, to be divided between his young widow and infant daughter. This trust would soon fuel the infamous custody battle that newspapers dubbed the trial of the century. Reginald's spectacular financial collapse represented the culmination of a multi-generational psychological progression. Unlike the Commodore, who created wealth through savage determination, unlike William Henry, who maintained it through anxious discipline, unlike Cornelius II, who balanced it with philanthropy, Reginald knew only consumption. His development lacked critical psychological inputs. The stern guidance of an authoritarian father had vanished during his formative years. Where earlier generations received validation only after demonstrating competence, Reginald enjoyed approval without corresponding expectations. Without an authority figure imposing boundaries, in psychological terms, Reginald exhibited classic third-generation syndrome. Having neither created wealth himself nor witnessed its creation, he lacked both skills and motivation for preservation. The psychological trajectory of the Vanderbilt fortune had reached its inevitable conclusion. The obsessive accumulation had transformed fully into pathological spending, and the infant Gloria, born into collapsing splendor, would carry this psychological inheritance into the next generation.
The dynasty ended with heiress-turned-fashion designer Gloria Vanderbilt. After her death in 2019, her son Anderson Cooper sorted through troves of letters, documents, and journals, giving voice to the Vanderbilt ancestors he never knew.
The poor little rich girl never stood a chance. Gloria Vanderbilt entered the world on February 20th, 1924. Born into the wreckage of a once great fortune, her identity already a national obsession. At 18 months old, her father Reginald died from cirrhosis, leaving her half of a $5 million trust fund, the meager remnants of the Vanderbilt fortune. The real inheritance proved psychological rather than financial. At age 10, Gloria became the unwilling center of a custody battle dubbed the trial of the century by ravenous Depression-era newspapers. Her mother, Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt, and paternal aunt, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, battled for control of both the child and her trust fund. The courtroom became a theater of class warfare as Americans, mired in economic depression, devoured salacious details about the dysfunctional ultra-wealthy. After her aunt won custody, Gloria would later tell her son Anderson, "I had no relationship with her at all and just worshipped her from afar. I felt like an imposter." Gloria's relationship with wealth mirrored her fragmentary childhood, inconsistent, unstable, ultimately unreliable. Coming into her inheritance at 21, she embarked on a series of marriages and careers in art, acting, and eventually fashion design. In the 1970s, she launched her designer jeans line, her swan logo adorning millions of back pockets across America. At the height of success, she reportedly earned $10 million in royalties in 1980 alone. Yet the Commodore's pathology of money had morphed again. Gloria oscillated between making and losing fortunes. The 1980s brought catastrophe when Gloria discovered her lawyer had defrauded her of millions and failed to pay her taxes. The IRS placed a lien against her properties for $2.5 million. Forced to sell her homes, she faced financial ruin once more. Her son Anderson, born in 1967, watched this cycle with increasing wariness. By age 13, Cooper had begun working as a child model to earn his own money. "Work for me has been the thing which has gotten me through everything," he would later confess. Rather than resenting the absence of Vanderbilt wealth, Cooper embraced independence. "I don't believe in inheriting money," he declared, calling it an initiative sucker and a curse. He deliberately distanced himself from the Vanderbilt legacy, identifying as a Cooper, the surname of his father, who grew up poor in Mississippi. The final irony arrived in 2019 when Gloria died at 95. She left her son approximately $1.5 million, confirming that the Vanderbilt fortune had fully completed its evaporation. Yet something unexpected happened as Gloria's life concluded. Cooper, who had spent decades avoiding the Vanderbilt legacy, found himself drawn to understand it. In 2021, he co-authored Vanderbilt, The Rise and Fall of an American Dynasty, with historian Catherine Howe. His purpose was not to glorify family wealth, but to examine how money had warped each generation that touched it. The great fortune had come full circle. What began as a pathological fixation on accumulating wealth had produced 5 generations later a man who found psychological freedom by rejecting wealth's grip entirely. Cooper's financial independence achieved what the Vanderbilt fortune never could: genuine self-worth. The final descendant had escaped the gravity of his great-great-great-grandfather's obsession, and in this liberation lay the most valuable inheritance of all. You've probably caught yourself daydreaming about sudden wealth, a lottery win, a business breakthrough, an unexpected inheritance. But have you ever considered that receiving vast wealth might be more of a curse than a blessing? Indeed, in the year 1877, the Vanderbilt heirs faced this very situation on an unimaginable scale. Nearly $3 billion in today's money, one of the largest fortunes in American history. And their response: building palatial mansions, hosting legendary parties, living like European royalty, might even mirror exactly what you've imagined doing with sudden wealth. Yet, their story ends not in sustained luxury, but in one of history's most dramatic financial collapses. Thus, in today's episode, we'll trace their spectacular rise and fall, exploring how 3 generations of Vanderbilts transformed their grandfather's hard-won empire into a cautionary tale about wealth, legacy, and the price of luxury, as we describe the Vanderbilt heirs who lost $2.9 billion. On the morning of the 4th of December 1877, William Henry Vanderbilt woke up as the richest man in America. You see, his father, the Commodore, had left him a fortune of $95 million, equivalent to nearly $2.9 billion US today. The marble halls of his Fifth Avenue mansion at 640 Fifth Avenue echoed with purpose, a monument to his family's meteoric rise from Staten Island ferry operators to railway titans. Unlike his father, who had clawed his way up from the shipping docks of New York Harbor, William Henry possessed a different kind of genius. Over the next 8 years, he would double the family fortune to nearly $200 million through shrewd railroad consolidations and market manipulations. Yet in this very success lay the seeds of destruction. His children were born into a world where wealth seemed as natural as air. They inherited not money, but a peculiar American birthright, the obligation to display their fortune in ways that would have made their grandfather, the Commodore, turn in his freshly dug grave. The Commodore had lived modestly in a simple brownstone. His grandchildren would build palaces. The transformation began with Cornelius Vanderbilt II, William Henry's eldest son. His mansion at First West 57th Street would become the largest private residence ever built in New York City, a monument to excess that occupied an entire city block. His brother, William Kissam Vanderbilt, not to be outdone, commissioned Richard Morris Hunt to design a limestone chateau that would make Fifth Avenue gasp. But it was the next generation that would truly test the limits of the Vanderbilt fortune. William Henry watched from his study as his grandchildren's ambitions expanded beyond even New York's gilded boundaries. While the Commodore had invested in infrastructure that built America, his great-grandchildren would invest in European art, French furniture, and Italian marble, assets that generated nothing but awe. The numbers told a story that kept William Henry awake at night. Each mansion required a staff of at least 25 servants. The annual operating costs alone could have funded a small railroad. Yet these expenses paled in comparison to the society obligations, the yachts, the thoroughbred stables, and the endless pursuit of social supremacy. In his final years, William Henry sensed a change coming to America, a transformation that would require more than just vast wealth to navigate. The political winds were shifting against the great monopolies his father had built. Popular opinion was turning against displays of excessive wealth, and his heirs, raised in unprecedented luxury, seemed blind to these gathering storms. As William Henry's life drew to a close in 1885, the Vanderbilt fortune stood at its apex. But beneath the glittering surface of America's greatest fortune, cracks were beginning to form. The next generation of Vanderbilts was about to learn a harsh lesson about wealth. Creating it was one thing. Keeping it would prove to be something else entirely. In 1883, when Cornelius Vanderbilt II first opened the doors to his new mansion at First West 57th Street, the scale of Vanderbilt ambition reached its architectural apex. The house stretched an entire city block, requiring a small army of servants to maintain. The grand hall gleamed with rare Italian marble, each piece selected and imported at staggering expense. But more telling than the mansion's size was its purpose. It existed not to shelter or comfort, but to announce. The family's determination to display their wealth transformed Fifth Avenue into a procession of limestone palaces. Each new mansion aimed to eclipse its predecessors, turning New York's most fashionable street into a battlefield of architectural one-upmanship. Tourists gathered daily outside their homes, turning the family's private lives into public theater. The Vanderbilts responded to this scrutiny not by retreating, but by building ever more impressive monuments to their wealth. Meanwhile, the railroad empire that generated this fortune faced mounting challenges. New government regulations threatened their monopolies. Labor unions challenged their authority. The Interstate Commerce Act of 1887 specifically targeted the railroad industry's pricing practices. But in the rarefied air of Newport and Fifth Avenue, such concerns seemed distant and irrelevant. Each member of the third generation seemed determined to outdo the others. While Cornelius II reigned over Fifth Avenue, his younger brother George was secretly planning something even more ambitious. In the mountains of North Carolina, he would build Biltmore, a chateau so vast it would make his siblings' homes look modest by comparison. The construction costs would strain even the massive Vanderbilt fortune. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt, Cornelius II's son, exemplified the third generation's departure from their grandfather's business priorities. While the Commodore had devoted his life to building his railway empire, Alfred poured millions into Sagamore Farms, developing one of America's premier horse breeding operations. The contrast between generations could not have been starker. The Commodore had seen every dollar as a tool for building more wealth. His great-grandchildren saw money as a means to escape the very business that had created it. They became collectors, sportsmen, and socialites, everything except the hard-driving businessmen who had built the family fortune. By the 1890s, the annual operating costs of the various Vanderbilt properties had grown astronomical. Each mansion required an army of servants. Each horse farm demanded constant investment. Each yacht needed a full crew year-round. But more dangerous than these visible expenses was an invisible shift taking place in American business. One that would test whether the Vanderbilt's railway empire could survive without the ruthless focus of its founders. As the century drew to a close, J.P. Morgan, already the most powerful banker in America, was restructuring the railroad industry. His vision for America's railroads had nothing to do with family dynasties or marble mansions, and in his methodical consolidation of power, he was about to teach the Vanderbilts a lesson about wealth that would echo through generations. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the first cracks in the Vanderbilt financial edifice began to show. The family's vast network of railroads, once the undisputed titan of American transportation, faced unprecedented challenges. Standard Oil and other industrial giants now commanded the freight rates that the Vanderbilts had once dictated. The monopolistic practices that had built their fortune were under assault from President Theodore Roosevelt's trust-busting campaign. But in the grand salons of Fifth Avenue, a more immediate crisis was unfolding. The third generation of Vanderbilts had mastered the art of spending wealth, but not of generating it. Each year, the maintenance costs of their estates consumed more of the family's capital. Biltmore alone required hundreds of thousands of dollars annually just to keep its doors open. The Newport cottages swallowed fortunes in upkeep, their massive staff payrolls matching those of small factories. Cornelius Vanderbilt III, known as Neely, provided perhaps the most telling example of the family's transformation. Despite inheriting the business acumen that had characterized his grandfather, he found himself largely disinherited by his father Cornelius II, who disapproved of his marriage to Grace Wilson. His portion of the inheritance, $1.5 million compared to his siblings' dozens of millions, marked the first public rupture in the family's unified facade. The family's grip on their railroad empire had been slowly loosening since the 1890s. J.P. Morgan's growing influence in the industry gradually pushed the Vanderbilts to the periphery of the business they had once dominated. The family that had once dictated terms to Wall Street now found themselves increasingly dependent on the banking establishment's goodwill. The most revealing shift came in how the fourth generation viewed the source of their wealth. While the Commodore had spent his days poring over shipping manifests and railway timetables, his great-great-grandchildren rarely set foot in a railroad office. They inherited shares but not stewardship, wealth but not the weight of responsibility that had accompanied it. William K. Vanderbilt II embodied this evolving identity. Though he maintained some involvement in the family's railroad interests, his true passion lay in scientific pursuit. His oceanographic expeditions, while intellectually valuable, represented a dramatic departure from the profit-focused ventures that had built the family fortune. In 1913, a new threat emerged: the federal income tax. The Vanderbilts, like many of America's wealthiest families, had never structured their holdings to withstand systematic taxation. Their vast properties, designed to display wealth rather than generate it, would soon become magnificent liabilities. But even as their financial power ebbed, none of the Vanderbilts could have predicted the devastating blow that awaited them. A blow that would come not from government regulation or business competition, but from an entirely unexpected quarter. The 1920s marked not a sudden collapse, but the acceleration of a decline decades in the making. Even before the Great Depression, the signs of the Vanderbilts' waning fortune were impossible to ignore. In 1926, the most visible symbol of this transformation occurred when the magnificent Cornelius Vanderbilt II mansion at 57th Street and Fifth Avenue, perhaps the greatest private residence ever built in America, was sold for $7 million to make way for Bergdorf Goodman. The forces dismantling the Vanderbilt fortune were more complex than any single market crash or economic downturn. The rise of income tax and inheritance tax steadily eroded their capital. The explosive growth in the number of heirs meant the fortune was split into ever smaller portions. Each generation's lifestyle expectations remained aristocratic, even as their individual shares of the family wealth diminished. The railroad empire that had generated their wealth faced fundamental challenges. The rise of automobiles transformed American transportation. New regulations cut into profits. The interstate highway system would soon make passenger rail travel increasingly obsolete. The Vanderbilts' influence over the New York Central Railroad, once the crown jewel of their grandfather's empire, continued to wane. Their vast estates, designed for a different era, became increasingly unsustainable. Property taxes rose while income from investments declined. The armies of servants required to maintain these properties represented expenses that couldn't be justified as the family's circumstances changed. Fine furniture, rare paintings, and precious artifacts that had been collected at enormous expense were gradually sold off, often at fractions of their purchase prices. The fourth generation of Vanderbilt's faced a transformation their ancestors could never have imagined. The nature of American wealth itself was changing. The era of railroad barons and robber barons was giving way to a new kind of capitalism. Family dynasties were being replaced by corporate structures. Personal empires were yielding to shareholder ownership. Some members of the family adapted to these changes better than others. Several pursued careers in journalism, arts, and other professions, a marked departure from their ancestors' focus on empire building. Others continued to live on inherited wealth, watching it slowly diminish with each passing year. The Great Depression, when it came, merely intensified pressures that were already reshaping the family's position in American society. The Vanderbilt story became a cautionary tale of American wealth, not because their fortune vanished overnight in the crash of 1929, but because it dissolved slowly over decades through a combination of taxes, division among heirs, changing economic conditions, and the mounting costs of maintaining a lifestyle that belonged to another century. Yet even as the physical emblems of their wealth disappeared, the Vanderbilt's were about to demonstrate that a family's true legacy isn't measured in mansions or millions. The final chapter of the Vanderbilt Railroad empire came in 1968, when the New York Central Railroad merged with its longtime rival, the Pennsylvania Railroad. It was a union born of desperation. Penn Central would declare bankruptcy by 1970, marking the definitive end of the railroad dynasty the Commodore had built a century earlier. The numbers tell a shocking story. In 1877, William Henry Vanderbilt inherited $95 million, which through shrewd business acumen he increased to $232 million before his death in 1885. If that fortune had simply kept pace with inflation and remained intact, it would be worth billions today. Instead, it evaporated through a combination of inheritance taxes, maintenance costs, and a fatal disconnect between wealth creation and wealth preservation. The mansions that once lined Fifth Avenue exist now only in photographs. The Breakers in Newport stands as an icon of the family's former glory. Though until 2018, the family still maintained private use of the third floor as a summer residence, even as tourists filed through the floors below. Biltmore, though still privately owned by Vanderbilt descendants, operates as a commercial enterprise. Its grounds, reduced from the original 125,000 acres to approximately 8,000, now support hotels, restaurants, and a winery necessary to maintain the estate's vast operating costs. The heirs who squandered the fortune weren't villains. They were products of their time and upbringing. The same social pressures that drove them to build palatial homes also prevented them from adapting to changing economic realities. Their tragedy wasn't that they spent lavishly, it was that they lost the capacity to generate wealth that had distinguished their forebears. The Commodore had started with nothing, building his fortune through a relentless focus on business fundamentals. William Henry had more than doubled the family wealth through shrewd management of existing assets. But their descendants faced a paradox. They had been raised to be aristocrats in a country founded in opposition to aristocracy. They had inherited wealth, but not the hunger that created it. The final irony of the Vanderbilt fortune lies in what survived its dissolution. While the family's financial empire crumbled, the institutions they endowed flourished. Vanderbilt University, founded by the Commodore's initial $1 million gift, equivalent to $29 million today, grew into one of America's premier educational institutions. The family's architectural legacy, though diminished, helped establish the preservation movement in American cities. Today, the Vanderbilt name still carries weight, but it's no longer synonymous with unimaginable wealth. Instead, it serves as a reminder that fortunes, no matter how vast, are not self-perpetuating. Each generation must either build upon its inheritance or watch it slowly slip away. Beneath the expansive sky of American history, few family narratives weave as sumptuous a thread as that of the Vanderbilt family. With flourishes of opulence and panache, this old money dynasty not only carved their name into the very soul of America's economic saga, but also embroidered an iconic legacy upon the nation's architectural canvas. Indeed, perhaps no other family lineage from the Gilded Age has etched such a distinct and enduring mark into the history of grand mansions in the United States. Yet even the mightiest of trees can be hewn from their roots. And in the 20th century, an ironic twist of fate saw the Vanderbilts quite literally evicted from one of their most magnificent creations. Their ancestral abode, the Breakers, an estate grand enough to mirror the family's colossal repute, fell to the hands of a local preservation society. In today's episode of Old Money Mansions, we'll share this shocking tale of rags to riches to rags, from reveling in sumptuous summer retreats to being served a vicious notice to vacate, as we describe how the Vanderbilt family got evicted from their own mansion. In the mid-1800s, Cornelius Vanderbilt, better known to the creme de la creme and the murmurs of New York's alleyways as the Commodore, deftly transformed a razor-sharp business edge into the underpinnings of a transportation behemoth. Following a sterling tenure with Thomas Gibbon's steamship enterprise, Vanderbilt caused quite the splash, undercutting rivals with fares so low they practically begged him to take their bribes and sail his entrepreneurial spirit into calmer waters. But his dominion over the maritime market, it seems, was but a prelude. As the 1860s commenced, the Commodore shifted gears to the clanking tracks of the railroads. With the cunning of a chess grandmaster, he enveloped the Hudson River Railroad, and in a relentless pursuit, clasped the New York Central Railroad into his fold. Not to be stalled, the Lake Shore and Michigan Southern Railway soon followed. These maneuvers were not just business transactions, they were bold strokes reshaping the nation's contours. So by his final bow, the Vanderbilt family's wealth was almost unrivaled, with the Commodore's moniker etched into the very spine of railroad nobility. Yet, to paint the Vanderbilt legacy as merely a tale of commercial victories would be to ignore its immense importance in the history of American architecture. Take the Biltmore Estate, for instance, conceived by George Washington Vanderbilt II and perched amongst the green embrace of North Carolina's Asheville Mountains. This Gilded Age masterpiece, with its Indiana limestone embracing a sprawling 365 feet, is the very embodiment of Vanderbilt extravagance. But the architectural exploits of this illustrious family didn't peak with the Biltmore. There was also, of course, the Breakers Mansion in Newport, Rhode Island, the immaculate stone subject of today's intrigue. A Vanderbilt beacon of grandeur, the Breakers was erected as a summer escape for Cornelius Vanderbilt II, dreamed up by the renowned architect Richard Morris Hunt, and its construction spanned from 1893 to 1895. Inspired by European palatial elegance, the Breakers was a bold declaration of the Vanderbilts' regal aspirations on American soil. Clad in brick and Indiana limestone, the Breakers Mansion stands as a tribute to the American Renaissance revival, echoing a Roman palazzo and epitomizing Gilded Age splendor. Its great hall, a cavernous expanse of 50 feet in all directions, is a shrine to the excesses and ambitions that marked the time. And when the Breakers rose from the ashes of a predecessor claimed by fire in 1892, it wasn't just a building that took shape, but a monument to the incredible wealth and reach of the Vanderbilts. Yet, with the arrival of the Roaring Twenties, the whispers of change grew even louder than the chatter in local speakeasies. The Vanderbilt wealth, once perceived as bottomless, ebbed, segmented among heirs with a fondness for the fanciful. As the Great Depression loomed, the family's grip on railroads loosened, and the family found themselves navigating a world not to the rhythm of steam engines, but to the buzz of a new era's tune. As the 1940s rolled into the 1950s, the United States bore witness to the dawn of architectural preservation movements, a collective tipping of the hat to the nation's historic grandeur. Specifically, this newfound reverence had its prologue in the 19th century, when the homes of the nation's political architects, John Hancock and George Washington, teetered on the brink of oblivion. Subsequently, this kindled a spirited national dialogue weighing the virtues of historical sanctity against the siren call of economic progress that often beckoned towards destruction. Into this fray stepped entities like the Preservation Society of Newport County, Rhode Island, an ensemble cast with a mission to champion the cause of conservation over capitulation. Anchored in 1945 by the civic-minded Catherine and George Warren, the society initially donned the mantle of the Georgian Society, vowing to shield the venerable Hunter House, a Georgian colonial gem perched by the harbour, from the relentless march of development. It was against this backdrop that the Breakers Mansion, that paragon of Gilded Age opulence at 44 Ochre Point Avenue, encountered its own existential crossroads. Constructed as a summer haven for Cornelius Vanderbilt II, by 1945 this palatial abode had ripened from a private family sanctum into a public con, capturing the nation's fascination, and the plot thickened when Gladys, Cornelius II's youngest daughter and the estate's custodian post-1934, cast her lot with the Preservation Society. With an eye for history's worth and a heart for civic duty, she flung open the Breakers' doors in 1948, not merely to parade its splendor, but to bolster the Society's coffers and creed. Thus, a private mansion's transformation into a historic public shrine was set in motion. This changing of the guard was inked in a lease that was, in essence, a gentleman's agreement, a token $1 per year, allowing the Society to shepherd the Breakers' legacy into the public eye, while Gladys maintained her private apartment aloft on the 3rd floor. Indeed, it was a dance of private grace with public gaze, and the Breakers blossomed into a pilgrimage site for those lured by the siren song of Gilded Age grandiosity. However, the partnership between the Preservation Society and the Vanderbilt-Heirs, once formed in the spirit of safeguarding a shared legacy, would soon begin to show signs of strain beneath the surface of apparent harmony. As tension simmered, the proud Vanderbilt descendants would next face off against the Society's unwavering commitment to conservation, as the grandeur of the Breakers stood silently, awaiting the outcome of a historic clash that promised to redefine the mansion's destiny. The year 1972 flipped open a crucial chapter in the saga of the Breakers Mansion when the Preservation Society of Newport County struck a deal like no other. You see, the next generation of Vanderbilt heirs passed the mansion's torch to the Society for $366,000, equal to roughly $2.4 million in today's currency, an almost criminally affordable sum, we must say. Yet, this exchange of deeds was not just a swap of greenbacks. It was laced with the understanding that the Vanderbilt aura would linger within the Breakers' walls. Countess Sapari, Sichenyi's heir, retained her residence post-sale, and upon her exit, Gladys and Paul Sapari, her children, then continued to grace the mansion's 3rd floor, their presence a legacy inhabitant within the gilded cage. But the Vanderbilt descendants eyed this pact with a medley of respect and skepticism. While the Society's preservationist zeal was commendable, disputes emerged. Tensions simmered over the significance of family heirlooms adorning the mansion's halls, and whispers of commercialism encroaching upon historical fidelity echoed. The Society's staff, accused of undervaluing Vanderbilt artifacts, found themselves in the thick of a genteel tug-of-war. Additionally, as the opulent 1980s came in, they cast a shadow over the Vanderbilt fortune, once a monolith of American wealth, now a dwindling empire facing a pecuniary storm. The Breakers stood as a beautiful, if ominous, symbol of this shift, its upkeep a lodestone for the Preservation Society, as the Vanderbilt heirs navigated financial problems and increasingly leaned on the Society's largesse. At the top of 1998, a gentle tranquility appeared to be lovingly draped over the historic Breakers Mansion, much like the serene sea caressing its shore. The mansion stood majestic, a silent witness to the then symbiotic connection that thrived within its walls, a relationship between the Preservation Society and the living vestiges of the mansion's creators, Paul and Gladys Sapari, great-grandchildren of the legendary Cornelius Vanderbilt II. That same year, the board president of the Preservation Society had even written words of mutual benefit and historical continuity, remarking, "It will be helpful to us to be able to tell our visitors that the original owner's great-grandchildren continue to live in the house." And Paul and Gladys, in their gracious commitment, had not only served on the board of trustees, but had also given their time and efforts like precious offerings, contributing to the mansion's thriving legacy. Yet beneath this facade of harmonious existence, a looming shadow crept stealthily, precipitated by the death of their mother, Countess Anthony Sapari, soon thereafter. A turning point was quickly at hand, and though the upper stories of the breakers continued to cradle the last Vanderbilt descendants, the tides of their rapport with the Preservation Society began to shift. The Sapari children quickly found themselves grappling with a sense of diminishing acknowledgement, their contributions and their profound connection to the mansion seemingly slighted. In fact, their discomfort was met with a veiled warning from the board president, chilling in its brevity. Their occupancy was as fragile as a house of cards, and ready to topple at the whisper of a moment's notice. And then, the year 2018 emerged as a watershed in the narrative of the breakers and the Vanderbilt lineage. The mansion stood at the vortex of a vehement debate, a proposed visitor center poised to punctuate its grounds. The Vanderbilt descendants stood in stout opposition, their dissent rooted in a deep-seated desire to preserve the sanctity of the landmark's historic architectural and horticultural style. Yet the Rhode Island Supreme Court, in its ruling, chose not to halt the Society's aspirations to build the modern visitor center, a decision that resonated with the heavy finality of a gavel, stripping the Vanderbilt family of their lingering influence over the estate. By the 7th of August, 2018, the atmosphere within the breakers had taken on the weight of a historic dirge. The Vanderbilt descendants, Paul and Gladys Sapari, were served an eviction from their own ancestral home, a decision wrapped in the guise of necessity due to the antiquated and perilous state of the building's interiors. Despite this ostensibly mutual resolution, whispers of the Society's vindictive undercurrents circulated, as if the eviction was a veiled retribution for the siblings' defiance against the visitor center. Undoubtedly, this chapter in the Vanderbilt saga was as poignant as it was public, the media's lenses magnifying every contour of this dramatic unfolding. The breakers' mansion, once a glittering jewel in the crown of American wealth, now witnessed the last of the Vanderbilts stripped from their generational hearth. Thus concluded an era, an elegiac adieu not merely to the presence of a family within walls of grandeur, but to the very essence of their living legacy. By 2019, the breakers' mansion had gracefully transitioned to a new epoch in its storied existence. No longer the secluded domain of the Vanderbilt lineage, its ornate gates had swung open to the public realm, transformed into a vibrant museum, an edifice of learning and preservation echoing the echoes of the Gilded Age lifestyle. The metamorphosis of the breakers into a beacon of cultural heritage marked a profound shift in its essence. The grandiose rooms and halls, which once resonated with the whispers of private lives, now bustled with millions of footsteps walked by the curious and the awe-inspired. Visitors wandered through the opulent spaces, their senses bathed in the grandeur that once was the privilege of the elite amidst a time of great industrial strides and gaping societal divides. Audio tours would narrate tales of economic fervor, social stratifications, and political undercurrents that defined the era, while the Preservation Society's scholarly series, The Gilded Age Years Transforming America, dived deeper into the transformative period that shaped modern America. Moreover, the Breakers Museum journey became a vital sentinel for Gilded Age architecture, preserving its intricate beauty for the admiration and study of future generations. Peering into the horizon, the Breakers now navigates the dichotomy of preserving a glittering past, while engaging a new generation in the historical dialogue. Yet, amidst the mansion's renaissance, a disquieting note of discord has been struck. The legal entanglements between the Vanderbilt family and the Preservation Society, a sad waltz of contention, have left a blemish upon the breakers' dignified facade. This strife, filled with legal battles and public dismay, has cast a shadow over the mansion's illustrious image, introducing a narrative of contemporary conflict to an otherwise harmonious historical recollection. As the breakers stands today, it is more than just a mansion. It is a monument that pulsates with life. Its journey, a storied voyage through family legacies, societal evolution, and now legal complexities, continues to captivate and educate in a perpetual dance of historical elegance and modern reality.